So we've moved on to the driver's side of the car. We're going to jack up the car, put it on a jack stand safely, and then remove the rear wheel. For our next step, we're going to remove the plastic fender liner here. We just have to remove the small mudguard here. And we're going to just pull the rivets out all the way around and pull this out of the car. Now once again, we have two 8mm bolts located here. We'll remove the two 10mm plastic nuts here and here. And we have three more plastic rivets to remove. We have one tucked up here, and one here, and then one more down there. And here's what those plastic rivets look like. Now there's a few more things to remove before we can pull this liner out. We have another 8mm bolt located right here. And right on the subframe bushing here, we have one more plastic rivet. Now we can move the whole thing out of the way. Okay, once again we're going to take our block of wood, this 2x4, and wedge it in between the frame of the car and the trailing arm. Basically what we're doing is making sure the distance between that trailing arm and the body stays the same so that it's easy for us to remove and install that rear strut assembly. Now if we look up inside the wheel well, we have an expansion tank and there's two 10mm bolts we need to loosen up, so we can drop that down just a little bit and give us enough space so that we can maneuver that rear strut assembly out of the car. And once again, we are going to use our impact gun to zap off that 21mm bolt from the bottom of the shock. Now alternatively, we can put a 21mm ratchet wrench in here. There's really limited space in here to try to fit in, you know, something like a breaker bar or an impact gun. So 21mm ratchet wrench definitely would help out in this situation. Now even with this 21mm ratchet wrench on here, is going to be really difficult to break it loose, so I just use a 2.5 pound hammer and pound on it like this until it breaks loose and we can remove that bolt. Now once again we're going to go up inside the car and remove the three bolts from the top of the strut mount that secure the top of the strut to the sheet metal in the car. And once again, here are the three bolts that I'm talking about. Now in order to make enough room to get this shock out, we're going to have to pop out the lines here from the body on the side and then maneuver this tank down very carefully and out of the way, just so we have enough room to pull this shock out. Now these lines for the evap tank are pretty brittle and they're hard lines, so be sure not to force anything, take your time, and eventually you can pivot this down like so and out of the way. Now just a few minutes ago I had a friend help me by standing on this rotor with their full body weight, and then I was able to force our 2x4 in between that trailing arm and the body. That's going to be a necessary step to make sure that we have as much room as possible. Just an extra 1/4 inch of space can be the difference between maneuvering the strut assembly out of the car and not being able to get it out. And once again, we'll use our special tools to compress the spring so we can replace the shock. Now I also want to mention, since I'm replacing this strut, it's perfectly okay to use an impact gun to remove this nut on the end. But if you were, say, just installing lowering springs or a different suspension and you want to reuse the strut, definitely use a wrench and a vice grips on the end here to carefully remove it so that we're not twisting this rod for the strut, because it can do damage. But since this is blown anyway and we're just replacing it, perfectly acceptable to use the impact gun. Also, eye protection, definitely recommended. And remove this nut facing away from yourself or anybody else. Also, sometimes the tool gets caught on the plastic lip here at the top of the strut, so we're just going to back these off, remove them, then we'll reassemble everything, recompress the spring again with the new strut, and we're good to go. Now you can also reuse this bottom spring pad here, transfer it over to the new strut, but I'm not going to be reusing these. Here's our new strut. Once again, link for these in the description below. Made in Germany, that's what we like to see. And again, just be sure that the coil here sets down into the top of the spring hat. And top it off with the new lock nut. And we'll clamp our vice grips down on the end of the strut rod. And we'll use a 17mm wrench to tighten that lock nut. And now we'll remove the tool. Now we can maneuver the new strut assembly up into the car. Now I'm just going to replicate the same way that it came out. Now it's just a matter of putting it all back together. Now, as you can see, I've placed the shock up into the body of the car with the strut mount through the 3 holes up in the sheet metal. And down here I've wedged a block of wood in between the trailing arm and the bottom of the shock just to hold it in place so that I can put the nuts on the top of the strut mount. Next, we'll position this metal bushing back into the hub. Now, if yours is not lined up properly, you can have somebody stand here on the brake disc, and then you can maneuver this into place. Now, I was able to slide this in really easily without assistance. The first time I did the passenger side, it was not as easy. And that really comes down to wedging the block of wood in between the frame and the trailing arm at the perfect distance. And we'll put the bolt back into place. Okay, next step. Position our expansion tank back into place and secure the 10mm plastic nut. Now we can remove the wood block. And we can put our plastic wheel well liner back into place. Okay, let's put the two plastic nuts back into place. Put the assorted plastic rivets back into place. As always guys, thank you so much for watching my content. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please smash that like button and subscribe.